Where our gaze goes, our body will follow. We can test this with the simple act of walking from one end of our mat to the other. Having that fixed gaze, but not just that, your peripheral gaze, makes that a very simple quest. However, if you close your eyes and do the same thing, it's not that you can't do it, but suddenly you're feeling the imprint you're making and those boundaries of your base of support, as well as trying to fill the space around you. And a very simple act of just walking from one end of your mat to the other becomes a little bit more complicated. This shows you how incredibly important your focal point truly is. And that's not to say that there is just one focal point or one definition of focal point when it comes to handstanding. It really depends on what our goals are. If we want to do a back bend in a handstand, then our gaze shifts forward. However, the most common problem is that that's not our intention. That is our fear that puts our gaze forward, saying, I don't want to fall out backwards. And in turn, the first reaction is a bend in the spine. It begins a back bend and then a flared rib cage, and then suddenly you're wondering, how do I get this arch out of my back? There's other things it has to do with that we will go over in the future, including the scapular thoracic region, a lot of lockdown that happens here in the shoulder girdle, and that forward gait from lifestyle and postural habits. Also, the bypassing of the core. Even when you have a strong core, when you take it upside down, it becomes a whole different ballgame. So then we have to figure out how to access the Uddiyana Bandha, the suction flying lock of the low belly back to the super mobile low spine, which in turn locks everything together, making all these separate parts one solid part to balance on the base of support, putting the weight of our entire body into our hands. So when we're learning to handstand, we don't want to look too far forward. That throws everything out of whack, takes us out of our neutral zone. It actually takes away our fixed, very convenient, very localized focal point, which should be between our thumbs, between our base of support, our two hands, which shouldn't be too close together either. Not so wide they have to bend, but not so close that it's not a really good base of support to balance your entire body on top of. Now, if we're intentionally trying to go into a back bend, yes, then your gaze does go forward, but we're not there yet, right? You have to be able to control a neutral handstand before we evolve it into a back bending or a hollow back, which your gaze would pull through to the other side. Now we're talking about drishti, because you have to depend a lot on that sort of peripheral gaze point, that sort of awareness of the space around you instead of a very fixed focal point. Athletes call this being in the zone. For our purposes of learning the neutral handstand, that's our beginning. We need that in place. Then we want that fixed, close focal point right between the thumbs or the heels of the hand. That means that we're utilizing our close focal point, but we're not taking our head into cranking it too far forward that we let go of the stacking of our weight over our base of support. Let's take a look at where I would like you to have your gaze point for that neutral handstand. Let's look at the common mistake that's initially made and how to fix that. And then let's look at different gaze points to achieve different goals. But you don't want your hands too close together because this is your base of support to support your entire body up on. You don't want them so wide that it creates a flare in the elbows. You still want to be able to externally rotate the arms and plug the humeral head into the socket, so then we can have a nice sturdy stacking occurring from wrist to elbow to shoulder on up. Then your gaze point's gonna fall somewhere between the thumbs and the heel pads of your hands at the center. So down here, not way up here, okay? So down here, not way up here. That's going to be a nice base of support and gaze point for your beginner handstand. Then I want you to keep one leg tucked into the belly. Don't try to immediately go for two legs straight up in the air. I've got my gaze point center between the heels of the hands. I'm pressing forward into my fingertips and I have space underneath the knuckles. And if I need to adjust, I'm going for that thumb knuckle pad, not the heel of the hand, not the wrist crease. I've got my right leg tucked in, quad to belly. This is securing me from going over backwards. It's making me tuck my tailbone and pull my low belly back. Now, what happens more often than it does not is that the gaze goes too far forward and there's a gap between the quad and the belly, creating instability and a teeter-tottering effect. Let's take a look at that. So even if you're trying to have one leg tucked, if your gaze is too far forward and your quad isn't glued into the belly, then this becomes your shape. Okay, and it's instability. I'm laying the pelvis into the low spine versus activating all the muscles around it. And you can see that it's not a very stable way to be. So take that gaze in, glue that quad in to the belly, and now I'm very strong and secure, and I've taken away that teeter-totter effect. See how stable this is in comparison to this and the wobbling that occurs here. Nail the neutral handstand first. That's going to be the gateway to all the fun stuff. Floating, transitioning, arm balances combined with your inversion. Once you get there, then we can change our gaze point depending on our goal. So if I'm intentionally trying to go into a back bend, first you'll want to start neutral so that everything is engaged and elongated as much as possible, finding that space to bend. So I find that neutral position first, and then I start to move into the back bend. And yes, my gaze comes forward, as you can see, to create that extension in the cervical spine, then the thoracic, and then last that lumbar. Still supported with the lifting of the pelvis. Hello, cuteness. Mwah, 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 mwah. And you can come out with control. And then there's the most difficult one, which is dropping the head, dropping your gaze point, relying heavily on the periphery and the drishti, the being in the zone, your gaze internally as much as externally. So let's take a look at that in hollow back. Coming into a tuck position as I transition into a charging scorpion hollow back. In the zone, it's more of a fuzzy gaze point, a feeling, internal as much as external. Okay. So there you have it, your different gaze points and why they're so essential, so crucial, and that initial close focal point being the most valuable one for that scaffolding, that blueprint on which to build.